before we begin, take a deep breath and let the noise of the day slowly fade. Unclench your jaw, soften your eyes, and let the weight of modern life melt away. Tonight, we're not chasing action or drama. We're wandering into the forgotten corridors of boring history, where medieval echoes linger and dark tales unfold like fading ink on parchment. Welcome to Midnight Sleepless, a resting place for tired minds, of the Middle Ages, ancient empires, and strange, dark history. Stories drip by like soft clouds. Here, knights, castles, and quiet empires return not with a roar, but with a whisper. Let me know in the comments, where in the world are you listening from, and what time is it there? And if you enjoy these slow, sleepy journeys through medieval times, boring facts, and forgotten worlds, a gentle tap on the subscribe button helps keep this calm storytelling alive. Now, let the story begin. The first light of dawn did not fall in the city all at once. It crept slowly, climbing over the rooftops, brushing the chimneys with pale gold, and finally spilling down the rows of brownstone houses. Their tall, red brick facades stood shoulder to shoulder, each window a square of mystery, each sill holding the remnants of yesterday's forgotten cup. A book left half-read, a vase with a single wilting flower beneath these brownstone windows. The morning had its own quiet rituals. The city was never silent. Yet, there was a gentleness in those early hours when the cobblestone street was still damp from the night's mist. And the bakery at the corner sent out the first curls of warm, yeasty air, from one window on the second floor. The curtains were pulled back just enough for a woman's hand to slip through, placing a pot of basil outside. Her fingers lingered there, brushing the leaves, releasing their scent into the cool morning. She always watered the plant at sunrise, as though the day itself would not begin unless that small ritual was complete. Inside her apartment, the sound of a kettle rising to a whistle joined the faint clatter of porcelain cups. She lived alone, but she set 2 cups on the table every morning. Some said it was habit, others thought it was memory. No one asked, and she never told. Across the street, a man in his 70s leaned out from his brownstone window with yesterday's newspaper tucked under his arm. He wore the same gray cardigan every morning, the elbows shiny with age. He tapped the ashes of his pipe into the little tin he kept on the sill, and with steady patience lit it again. The smoke curled upward, drifting into the sunlight like a ribbon of time. Children hurrying to school would sometimes wave at him, and he would lift his pipe in return, never speaking, never failing. His ritual was not in words, but in presence. At the corner apartment, the window rattled open suddenly, and a burst of energy filled the street. A boy of 12 leaned far too dangerously over the railing, calling out to a friend already on the sidewalk. His voice broke the hush of morning, sharp and full of life, bouncing against the stone walls. His mother's scolding soon followed, pulling him back inside, yet the street already carried his laughter. Hanging in the air long after he had gone, the bakery window was the loudest of all. Flour-dusted arms reached out to adjust the wooden sign, and soon the scent of fresh bread mingled with roasted coffee drifting from a cafe next door. Workers, still rubbing sleep from their eyes, paused by those windows, breathing in the promise of the day. For many, that smell was the true beginning of morning, more than the clock, more than the sun. There was a piano in one apartment, its sound barely escaping through the slightly cracked window. The notes were soft, hesitant at first, as though the pianist was still waking, still finding the keys in the half-light. But soon the melody grew steadier, a waltz floating above the street. Passers-by slowed their steps, listening without meaning, carrying the tune with them as they walked away. No one knew the pianist's name. No one ever saw her face. Yet every morning she gave the street its secret music, a ritual as invisible as breath, but as necessary as the turning of the sky. down on the ground. Beneath those same windows, a milkman left bottles at each doorstep, the glass shining with dew. A stray cat followed him, tail raised like a banner, waiting for him to pour a little milk into a saucer by the drain. He always did, and she always lapped it up quickly, disappearing into the alley before anyone else could notice. For the cat, too, it was a ritual, trusting that the morning would bring her share as the sun climbed higher. The street grew louder, yet the windows still told their quiet stories. Curtains swayed as people leaned out to shake crumbs from a cloth. Voices rose in greeting from one building to another, and radios began to hum with the news of the day. Each life, contained within its frame of stone and glass, spilled a little into the street, weaving together into something larger. The brownstones had stood there for more than a century. Their walls had seen wars, weddings, funerals, and forgotten birthdays. Yet every morning they seemed young again, dressed in the rituals of the people who called them home. And perhaps that was the secret of their endurance, not the strength of brick and mortar, but the small acts of living that repeated. Day after day, the woman with the basil pot lifted her cup to her lips and gazed out at the street. The old man puffed his pipe, his eyes tracing the smoke. The boy pressed his face to the glass, impatient for school to end before it had even begun. The pianist bent over her keys, her music chasing the dust from the corners of the room. The milkman clinked bottles against the stone, and the cat purred over her saucer. Together, without ever speaking, they gave the morning its rhythm. A rhythm beneath the brownstone windows, steady and familiar, yet always new. A rhythm that told the city, the day has begun, and so it did, again and again, as it always would. The back porch was small, with wooden planks that had grown tired over the years. They creaked whenever someone stepped out, as if reminding you of their age. From the porch, the view was simple but alive, a narrow alley where children played with chalk. Neighbors' voices carried over fire escapes, and the faint hum of Harlem never fully resting. On summer afternoons, the porch filled with the warmth of the sun, and in winter, it felt like a stage for the sharp winds that whipped down the block. This porch was where Ruth spent most of her quiet hours. She had a basket of laundry beside her, clothes folded into neat stacks with a rhythm that seemed almost ceremonial. To others, it might have looked like a chore, but to her, folding laundry was never just about keeping the house in order. Each shirt, each towel, each faded bedsheet carried the weight of memory. Her hands, wrinkled but steady, picked up a worn t-shirt. It was soft from years of use, the fabric thinned in places. She held it up for a moment, as if testing the air, for the memory it carried. It belonged to her son, James, who wore it to basketball games at the park just a few blocks away. She could still picture him running down the court, his laughter rising above the squeak of sneakers and the bounce of the ball. Folding the shirt carefully, she set it aside, and for a breath. The porch seemed filled with the echoes of boys shouting, "Pass it here," and one more shot. The laundry pile continued. A floral dress came next. It was hers from years ago, one she wore to Sunday service at the church down on 135th Street. She remembered walking with her sister, both of them in bright dresses, their hair pinned just so, the city buzzing with music from every corner. The dress smelled faintly of lavender soap, though the scent was mostly imagined now, drawn out of memory rather than fabric. She folded it with care, her fingers smoothing the creases, as if smoothing the years that had passed. From the porch, the world of Harlem unfolded like a quilt, sewn with endless colors. A saxophone drifted from a nearby window, someone practicing. Scales with stops and starts. The corner store bell chimed every time a customer walked in. The chatter of neighbors blended with the steady thump of footsteps on the stairs. Ruth listened as she folded, the sounds merging with her thoughts. The city never allowed silence, but that was fine. Silence could be heavy. She reached for a white towel, rougher than the clothes before it. This one reminded her of summers when the family went swimming at the public pool. James and his friends would come home soaked, towels wrapped around their shoulders, dripping water across the kitchen floor. She remembered scolding them for the mess, though secretly she loved the way their joy filled the apartment. Holding the towel, she smiled softly. Memories lived in ordinary fabric, more than in photo albums. Her neighbor, Miss Clara, sometimes stopped by on these afternoons. Today, Ruth heard her voice floating up from the alley. Clara was scolding the children for knocking over a trash can, her tone sharp, but her heart gentle. Ruth chuckled to herself. Clara's voice had been the same since they were girls, firm on the outside. But everyone knew she was the one who would sneak candy into children's hands once the scolding was over. The sun shifted lower, and the porch light above Ruth flickered as if deciding whether to turn on early. She kept folding. The pair of socks came next, mismatched as always. These belonged to her husband, gone many years now. He never cared much for order, not in socks, not in life. She remembered how he used to sit on this same porch, newspaper in hand, humming low to himself. The socks were thin now, barely holding together. She pressed them into a neat ball, her hands pausing as if reluctant to let go. The pile grew smaller, but the memories grew larger. Folding was like reading a book, each item a page that opened to a story. The porch became a theater of the past, and she was both audience and performer. She did not cry. She rarely did while folding. Instead, she let the memories rise and fall like music, some sweet, some aching, all stitched into the fabric of her life. Down the alley, a car radio played faintly, an old jazz tune that made her hum along. Music had always been part of Harlem's heartbeat, filling living rooms, back porches, and street corners. When she was younger, Ruth would dance to the records her father played, spinning until she grew dizzy, her laughter mixing with the trumpet's notes. Folding a bedsheet, she remembered that dizzy joy. She remembered her father's strong hands lifting her up when she stumbled. The bedsheet was large, and folding it alone took patience. She spread it out, the white cloth catching the last rays of sunlight. She brought one corner to the other. She thought of how many times this sheet had been washed, how many nights it had covered her family as they slept. Sheets carried secrets too, whispered conversations at night. The warmth of a fevered child, the comfort of rest after long days. She folded it carefully, almost reverently, and placed it at the bottom of the basket. The day dimmed further, and the porch light finally clicked on, casting a soft glow. Ruth leaned back for a moment, her work nearly done. She looked at the stacks of neatly folded laundry, each one a quiet monument to life lived. Around her, the world went on, children shouting, neighbors chatting, the city humming but on. The porch, time slowed enough for her to listen to memory itself. She thought of James again, grown now, living far from Harlem. He called when he could, but his voice on the phone was never the same as his laughter in the alley or his footsteps running up the stairs. Still, when she folded his shirts, she felt close to him, as if the fabric carried his presence across. The milestone, the last item in the basket, was a faded pillowcase. It had small blue flowers stitched along the edges, a pattern nearly worn away. She held it in her lap for a long time before folding it. That pillowcase once belonged to her mother, passed down through the years. Folding, it felt like holding hands across generations, the fabric connecting her to women who came before. Women who also folded laundry on porches, in kitchens, in quiet rooms where memory lived in cotton and thread. As the evening deepened, Ruth stacked the final pile and set the basket aside. The porch creaked again as she stood, but she did not rush inside. She lingered, letting the air wrap around her, letting the city's rhythm blend with her own. Folding laundry was done for the day, but holding memory never ended. She thought about how simple the ritual was: fabric, soap, sun hand, yet how full of life it became in her hands. She had folded years, folded laughter, folded tears, and laid them gently into stacks. Tomorrow she would do it again. Tomorrow another shirt would remind her of a summer game, another towel of a child's splash, another sheet of nights filled with warmth atop the porch, with its creaks and its view of Harlem's heartbeat, would hold her steady as always. And as long as there was laundry to fold, there would be memories to keep alive, one careful crease at a time. The morning light spilled softly through the lace curtains of the old house. Dust particles floated in the golden beams like tiny dancers suspended in time. On the wooden table near the window stood a dented tin coffee pot, its handle slightly bent, its lid loose from years of use. To anyone else, it was nothing more than an object worn, cheap, replaceable. But for Evelyn, the woman who lived in that house, it was something far greater. Every morning, she would heat water in it, listening to the faint rattle of the lid as steam rose. The sound reminded her of conversations once shared in this kitchen, voices that had since faded into silence. She would pour the steaming liquid into her chipped porcelain cup and sit near the piano in the living room. The piano was not in perfect condition, its keys yellowed with age. Some of them chipped at the edges, but to her, it was a bridge to another life. Evelyn had once been a pianist, not world famous, but admired in her town. The people in the neighborhood used to gather in her house for evening recitals. She would play Chopin, Schubert, sometimes a little jazz when her fingers felt playful. And on the small round table near the piano, always there had been the tin coffee pot. It was her ritual. She would brew coffee, pour a cup, and place the pot nearby before sitting at the keys. Somehow, the two objects became connected, one to warm her body, the other to stir her soul. But time had changed everything. The neighbors grew old. Some moved away, others passed. Her husband, who had always clapped the loudest after her performances, was now gone too. The piano sat mostly in silence, and the coffee pot, though still in use, felt heavier with memory than with water. Yet on this particular morning, something shifted. As Evelyn sipped from her cup, her eyes lingered on the piano. Air felt different, charged, as though the walls of the house were holding a secret they wanted to tell. She set her cup down and walked slowly toward the instrument. Her hand, thin and trembling, reached for the keys. She pressed one gently. A note rang out, slightly out of tune, but still alive. Another key followed, then another. Before long, her hands were moving more confidently, as though some hidden part of her had been waiting all along. Music filled the air, soft at first, then stronger, wrapping itself around the furniture, the walls, and even the tin pots still sitting on the table. The lid rattled faintly, as if in applause. Evelyn laughed softly at the thought. She kept playing, closing her eyes, remembering. She could almost hear her husband's voice saying, "Play that one again, Eve. You make the whole room glow." Fingers moved into a melody she hadn't touched in years, a piece she used to play when she was young and hopeful. The notes carried her back 2 nights filled with laughter, with the neighbors tapping their feet, with the smell of fresh coffee filling the air. She could feel it all, the warmth, the belonging, the joy. Hours passed like minutes. The sun climbed higher, shadows shifted across the room. When Evelyn finally stopped playing, she noticed something unusual. On the table, beside the tin coffee pot, lay an old sheet of music. She didn't remember leaving it there. The pages were slightly yellowed, handwritten in her own script from long ago. The piece was unfinished, left incomplete in her youth, when she had told herself she would come back to it someday. She stared at it for a long moment. The music seemed to call out, urging her not to leave it unfinished any longer. With a deep breath, she returned to the piano, placed the sheet before her, and began to work. At first, her hands were uncertain, though slowly, with patience and care, the missing notes began to reveal themselves. It was as if her younger self had been waiting all these years for her older self to finish the song. The tin coffee pot grew, cold on the table, forgotten as she poured her soul into the keys. The music that emerged was unlike anything she had ever played before. It was tender, yet powerful, fragile, yet enduring. It was a song of memory and loss, but also of resilience and quiet beauty. When the final note faded, Evelyn felt tears on her cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were the tears of someone who had finally found a missing piece of herself. She closed the lid of the piano, gently, like tucking in a child for sleep. Then she went to the table, poured what little remained of her cold coffee, and lifted the cup in a silent toast to her husband, to her neighbors, to her younger self, and to the tin coffee pot that had been with her through it all. That night, the house did not feel so empty. It felt alive again, as if the music had woken something that had been sleeping for too long. Lynn went to bed with a light heart, dreaming of melodies. The next morning, she woke before sunrise. She filled the tin coffee pot once again, listening to its gentle rattle as the water heated. She placed the pot in its usual spot near the piano, sat down, and began to play. The notes rose into the quiet dawn, weaving together past and present, memory and hope. For as long as her hands could move, she would play. And as long as the coffee pot remained, dented and humble though it was, it would stand as a witness to her music. Years later, after Evelyn was gone, the house was sold. Strangers came to clear out the furniture. Most of the items were taken to second-hand shops or thrown away. But one young woman, a piano student who had come to see the house, noticed the tin coffee pot sitting forgotten on a shelf. Something about it drew her in. She picked it up, feeling its weight, and decided to keep it. When she brought it home, she placed it on her piano. She didn't know why, only that it felt right. That night, as she practiced her music, the pot sat quietly beside her. The lid rattled ever so faintly, though there was no steam inside. And in that moment, the old tin coffee pot found its purpose, again carrying forward the memory of music, the warmth of mornings, and the gentle power of piano keys that refused to be forgotten. The house was silent once more, but the music lived on, carried from one pair of hands to another. And somewhere, in the quiet of eternity, Evelyn smiled. The morning sunlight filtered softly through the lace curtains, painting golden patterns on the wooden floor. The air inside the house smelled faintly of polish, the kind rubbed into shoes the night before. On the small table by the window, a pair of shiny Sunday shoes, weighted black leather with laces neatly tied, their surface reflecting light in a way that seemed to demand attention. They were too formal for an ordinary errand, too stiff for the short walk ahead. But that was the choice for today. Sliding feet into them was like stepping into a memory. The leather gripped tight at first, reminding of all the times such shoes were worn on special mornings, polished carefully for weddings, church, or family visits. They squeaked just slightly against the floorboards, as if to announce that this short trip to the corner store was not an ordinary walk, but something with its own small ceremony. The door opened to the world outside. The air carried a mix of scents, the faint sweetness of blooming flowers in a neighbor's yard, the sharper smell of gasoline from a car that had just passed, and a distant aroma of bread from a bakery down the block. The pavement, still cool from last night's stew, met the soles of those polished shoes with a sound different from sneakers or sandals. A clipped tap echoed with each step, bouncing off brick walls and stretching out into the quiet morning street. Children's laughter could be heard faintly in the distance. A group of them were drawing with chalk on the sidewalk, their hands dusty with colors. They paused to watch the shiny shoes walk by, whispering to each other in playful curiosity. The shoes felt almost too grown up for this small street, as if they belonged in an office or a church, not strolling past hopscotch lines and bicycles. Leaning against fences, every corner seemed to carry a small reminder of life unfolding in its ordinary rhythm. A man on his porch sipped coffee from a chipped mug, nodding as the sound of those shoes tapped past. A woman shook out a rug from her balcony, dust drifting down in the sunlight like tiny golden motes. The shoes kept their pace steady, each step measured, as if they understood that the day was not a day for rushing. There was something different about walking in formal shoes. They changed posture, changed the way the body carried itself. The back straightened, the head lifted a little higher, and even the eyes noticed things differently. The cracks in the pavement seemed sharper, the painted lines on the road brighter, the smell of the bakery closer. It was as if the shoes insisted on giving importance to even the smallest details. The corner store appeared at the end of the street, its faded sign swinging gently with the morning breeze. The bell above the door jingled softly as it opened. Inside, the air was cooler, filled with the scent of coffee grounds, paper bags, and the faint sweetness of candy that had been sitting too long in glass jars. The floor creaked beneath those polished soles, and the man behind the counter glanced up with a smile that mixed recognition and routine. "Morning," he said simply, as if that word carried the whole story of why someone might walk in wearing Sunday shoes. The shelves held their quiet abundance, cans stacked neatly, loaves of bread wrapped in thin plastic, apples shining with a waxy glow. Every item seemed to wait patiently, and the shoes moved slowly down the aisle, their sound softer against the store's wooden boards. Picking up a carton of milk felt almost ceremonial, as if this errand was not just about groceries, but about marking a moment, giving weight to the ordinary dot at the counter. Coins clinked softly on the glass surface. The man bagged the milk in a loaf of bread, slipping in a small pack of gum with a knowing grin. The kind of gesture that only happened in corner stores where faces were familiar. The bell jingled again on the way out, and the shoes stepped back into the sunlight, carrying not just groceries, but the rhythm of the morning itself. The walk back seemed slower, each step an echo of the first journey down. The shoes no longer felt stiff. They had softened into the walk, molding themselves to the curve of the foot. A child's chalk drawing now had a new figure sketched beside it, something that looked like a bird in flight. The man on the porch was gone, but his empty mug still rested on the railing, catching the sun. The rug on the balcony no longer swayed, now folded neatly over the rail. The world had shifted slightly in those few minutes, as it always does, quietly and without notice. The shoes carried the weight of those small changes. With every tap against the pavement, they seemed to collect pieces of the morning to chalk dust. The smell of bread, the warmth of the sun, the sound of coins. The walk was short, yet it stretched into something larger, a reminder that even the simplest errands can hold entire landscapes of memory and meaning. By the time the door of the house was reached again, the shoes had lost some of their shine to the dust of the street. They were no longer perfect, but that imperfection made them real. The bag was set on the table, the milk cool against the hand, the bread soft beneath its thin wrapper. The shoes, once again, rested quietly by the window, reflecting the room's light in a softer, humbler glow. And so, the walk to the corner store in Sunday shoes ended, not with grandeur, but with the quiet satisfaction of knowing that even the smallest journeys can leave behind echoes that linger far longer than the sound of footsteps. Every Saturday began the same way. with the sound of water running in the old bathroom sink and the faint crackle of the stove in the kitchen. Outside, the neighborhood was still stretching awake, but inside the house, the ritual had already begun. Saturday was hair day, and everyone knew what that meant. It was a rhythm, a tradition, a kind of quiet ceremony that wrapped around the house like a warm blanket, filled with laughter, complaints, and the unmistakable scent of pressing oil. Morning air always carried a heaviness of anticipation. On Fridays, the girls whispered about it, reminding each other to wash their hair or to make sure the comb was not missing again. By Saturday morning, the living room would be transformed into a salon, with the dining chairs dragged to the center of the floor. Towels folded in waiting, jars of grease and oil lined up like soldiers ready for battle. The radio in the corner usually played softly, gospel or old R&B, filling the room with something steady enough to keep the nerves calm. It always began with detangling. The wide-toothed comb was the weapon of choice, though sometimes it felt more like punishment than preparation. The youngest usually went first, sitting on the chair with legs swinging nervously, clutching a doll or book for comfort. The comb moved slowly through the thick strands, pulling and tugging, the teeth catching on knots that seemed to multiply on their own. Tears sometimes came, sometimes laughter, but always, always the patient voice of reassurance. Hold still, baby, almost done. And once the hair was free, once the tangles had surrendered, the ritual moved to the stove. The hot comb rested on the burner, its teeth glowing faintly with heat, carrying with it the promise of transformation. The scent of pressing oil drifted through the air, sharp at first, then softening into something almost sweet. That smell carried memories. It was the smell of mothers and grandmothers, of picture days and Easter Sundays, of school performances and weddings. It was the smell of care, of effort, of pride. Each stroke of the comb was deliberate. It moved from root to tip, smoothing, stretching, taming the wild curls into sleek, shining strands. The faint sizzle followed every pass, a whisper of smoke, rising just enough to leave its mark in the air. Sometimes the comb would graze too close to the scalp, and there would be a sharp gasp, a sudden flinch. "Don't move, now," came the reminder, and the process continued, steady and unyielding. The girls learned patience here, learned to sit still, learned to wait for beauty to emerge from discomfort. But it wasn't just about hair. It never was. Saturday Hair Day was about stories. While the comb worked its way through one head, the voices carried. Mothers told stories of their childhood, of walking to school with ribbons in their hair, of sitting in the same chair, wincing at the same hot comb, of feeling the same pride when it was all done. Sisters argued about music, about boys, about who got to sit next. Cousins shared secrets in whispers that weren't as quiet as they thought. Laughter spilled over the room, mixing with the smell of pressing oil, filling the air with something that felt like home. The hours passed slowly, but time had its own pace on Saturdays. The younger ones finished first, their hair tied with ribbons or barrettes, swinging shiny and straight as they ran off to play. The older ones waited longer, their hair needing more patience, more heat, more care. By the time the last head was done, the sun had usually shifted, sliding through the curtains in golden rays that lit up the strands of hair like polished silk. And then came the mirror moment. Each girl would stand in front of the mirror, turning her head from side to side, letting the light catch the shine, running her fingers down the smooth strands. For a moment, the long hours, the sore scalp, the tears, the boredom, all of it vanished. What remained was pride. What remained was beauty. And what remained, most of all, was the memory of the ritual, the feeling of being cared for, of being prepared, of belonging. Sometimes, visitors would come by during the process, stepping carefully into the living room like they were entering sacred ground. They would smile knowingly at the sight, maybe even share a memory of their own hair days. Everyone had a story connected to that scent, that sound, that ritual. It was something passed down, generation after generation, a thread that connected daughters to mothers, mothers to grandmothers, and grandmothers to the ones who came before. As evening approached, the living room would slowly return to normal. The chairs went back to their places. The towels were folded again, the combs cleaned and tucked away. The air still held a faint trace of pressing oil, lingering like a quiet echo of the day's work. The house settled, calmer now, the ritual complete. And though it was only hair, only strands pressed straight for another week, it was also so. Much more. It was care. It was tradition. It was love written into every stroke of the comb, into every sigh of relief, into every memory sealed with the scent of pressing oil. Saturday hair day never truly ended. It carried into Sunday morning, into the way the girls walked to church with ribbons glinting in the sun, into the way they held their heads higher, into the way they smiled at the compliments whispered in pews. It carried into Monday at school, where the shine lasted through lessons and playground games. And even as the week wore on, even as the strands began to curl again, the memory of Saturday remained, waiting patiently for the next week, the next ritual, the next story. Saturday. Hair day was never just about hair. It was about the bond, the time shared, the resilience taught through every tug and burn. It was about the smell that lingered long after the comb cooled, the smell that meant family, effort, and love. And every time the pressing oil was opened, every time the comb touched the flame, the ritual was renewed. The story continued, and the memory, warm and shining, lived on. The late afternoon sun slipped quietly through the lace curtains, laying thin golden stripes across the worn wooden floor. In the middle of the room stood an ironing board, its legs slightly shaky, its cover faded with years of use. But the sound of the iron hissing against fabric was steady, rhythmic, almost like breathing. Each press sent up a faint smell of warm cotton, and every crease smoothed out beneath the iron carried with it a memory. Miriam had been ironing in that same corner for nearly 40 years. She knew the rhythm of it better than most people knew, the rhythm of their own hearts. Ironing wasn't just work to hurt, it was a kind of thinking space, a place where stories unfolded, where secrets whispered themselves into being, and where the past and present met in quiet conversation. On the little table beside her, stacked neatly, were envelopes, letters from Georgia. The handwriting on them was careful, a little stiff, as though each stroke of the pen had been measured. They had come steadily for months, each envelope postmarked from a small town she had never visited. Georgia, to Miriam, was not just a state on the map. Key had become a voice that lived inside those folded papers, a companion that arrived faithfully in the mail. She picked up one of the letters now, slipping it from the envelope as she laid. Another shirt flat on the board. The iron's hiss filled the silence. She began to read. Dear Miriam, today the rain fell all morning, steady as a hymn. I sat on the porch and thought about how people spend their days, how we fold time the way we fold laundry. Some pieces we keep close, others we tuck away in drawers and forget until years later. Miriam smiled faintly. The words always carried with them the weight of thought, the kind of sentences you turned over in your mind long after you'd read them. She pressed the iron against the shirt, smoothing the fabric as though smoothing the writer's thoughts. The letters always came from the same Hand Samuels. He was an old friend she had known in her youth, though friend felt too small a word. Their lives had diverged long ago. She stayed. He left. For decades, silence had stretched between them, and then, suddenly, the letters began. At first, once a month, then once a week. Now, they were part of her routine as much as the ironing board and the hiss of steam. As she worked, she often spoke back not in letters, but in murmured words while pressing sleeves and collars. "You say rain folds time, Samuel?" she whispered now, "but it unfolds memory too. Do you remember that summer by the lake? The one where you swore you'd never leave, and yet you did." The ironing board became her confessional, her stage, her listening ear. Every wrinkle she pressed out seemed to release a memory. Shirts reminded her of school uniforms she had ironed for her children. Dresses carried the faint echo of Sunday mornings at church, and bed sheets spoke of long nights where she waited for her husband's footsteps on the porch. Life had been pressed, folded, and stacked away, just like the laundry. Another letter lay waiting. She slipped it open carefully, smoothing the page against the board before she read. "Dear Miriam, the cotton fields are white this week, soft as clouds gathered low to the ground. I think of you when I see them. I think of how you used to wear that white dress, the one with the blue stitching at the hem. You laughed when I told you it looked like it belonged to summer itself. I don't know why memory insists on returning to that image, but it does." Her hand froze on the iron. That dress. She hadn't thought of it in years, yet suddenly she could feel the fabric, smell the starch, see herself at 19 with the sun on her face. She pressed the iron down hard, as if anchoring herself to the present, to the shirt beneath her hands, to the steady heat. The ironing board conversations always began this way, silent letters stirring noisy memories. She talked back, quietly. "You remember more than I do, Samuel. Oh, maybe you just choose to remember differently. That dress was nothing special, but you make it sound like it was woven with gold." Her daughter, Ruth, often teased her about talking to herself while ironing. "Mama, you're in here carrying on whole conversations with that board," she'd say, laughing. But Miriam never explained. She never told Ruth about the letters from Georgia, never shared the way Samuel's words seemed to reach across years as easily as across state lines. She folded the finished shirt, laying it on the pile, then opened another letter. "Dear Miriam, do you ever think about how work holds memory? I was fixing the fence this morning, and it struck me how many times my father had done the same, his hands worn but steady. The hammer in my hand might as well have been his. And maybe that's what we leave behind, not grand gestures, but the way we do ordinary things. I like to think of you at your ironing board. I can almost hear the hiss of the iron as I write this." Okay. She let out a soft laugh, though her eyes stung. He knew. Somehow he knew. As though he could see her through the folds of time and space. Conversation deepened as the pile of laundry shrank. With each garment pressed, she answered him softly. "Yes, Samuel. It's the ordinary things that stay. The sound of scissors on fabric, the way a table is set, the rhythm of ironing. That's how life speaks." Evening crept in, the light fading to a dusky glow. The room smelled of warm cloth and faint starch, and the letters sat open like windows to another world. She ironed the last piece of white linen napkin, edges delicate with lace. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed it flat. She reached for the final letter in the stack, still unopened. The envelope was different, thicker, heavier. She slid the paper out slowly, almost afraid. "Dear Miriam, this will be my last letter. I am tired now, in a way that feels permanent. But doctor says there isn't much time. But I didn't want to leave without saying thank you. Thank you for being the memory I carried, the voice that never left me, even in silence. Don't ask for an answer, only that you know you were remembered. Always, yours, Samuel." The iron slipped from her hand, resting against the board with a faint hiss before she set it upright again. Her throat tightened. The ironing board conversations had always been one-sided, half imagined, half real. Now, the silence that followed was heavier than the years between them. She folded the letter carefully, pressing it flat with her palm, as though ironing out the wrinkles of grief. Then she laid it with the others, tied them all with a piece of ribbing, and placed the bundle in the drawer beside the ironing board. When Ruth came in later, she found her mother still sitting there, the iron cool, the pile of laundry neat. "Mama, are you all right?" Miriam smiled faintly, wiping her eyes with the corner of her apron. "Yes, child. I was just finishing a conversation." The ironing board stood silently, bearing witness, as it always had. And though no new letters would arrive from Georgia, the words already written would live on in the rhythm of pressing cloth, in the smell of warm cotton, in the quiet conversations carried by the hiss of steam, because some stories do not end. They fold themselves carefully, neatly, and wait like a pressed shirt in the drawer for the day they are needed again. Sunday in Harlem unfolded like a slow hymn soft at first, then rising gently with the voices of preparation, never hurried, always with reverence. In the brownstone's front room, light poured through the curtains in delicate ribbons, casting pale gold across the walls and settling in the folds of neatly laid clothes. The morning air carried a quiet sense of occasion, not dramatic, not grand, but attentive, purposeful. On the dressing table, a small row of hats stood like sentinels. Each had its own shape, its own tilt, its own quiet dignity. One was navy, with a satin bow that caught the light just so. Another, cream-colored, had a ring of tiny feathers stitched along its brim. The third, older than the others, was black wool felt, plain except for a single silk flower pressed gently above the temple. This was the one most often chosen. Its edge curved like memory. The woman lifted it from its place and turned it slowly in her hands. She didn't need to look in the mirror to know how it sat. She had worn it through many Sundays, many seasons, and its weight was familiar. It was not just an accessory. It was ritual and unspoken part of readiness, like tying an apron before cooking or folding sheets before sleep in the kitchen. Chicken stocks simmered in a heavy pot on the back burner, sending up a steam that smelled of thyme, black pepper, and onion skins. It had been started before the sun had risen, when the house was still wrapped in sleep. Now the scent drifted through every room, anchoring the morning with warmth. Her daughter sat at the small table in her church dress, its feet swinging just above the floor. She was quiet, but her eyes followed every movement, how her mother laid out gloves beside the hat, how she checked the seams of her stockings for snags, how she stirred the stock without lifting the lid too far, just enough to let the flavor speak. They would leave soon for church, but not yet. There was still time for the quiet before departure. The girls' shoes were already polished, laces tucked neatly, the leather reflecting a soft gleam from the kitchen window. On the seat beside her sat a hymnal, its spine cracked from years of use. Pages marked by slips of ribbon and corners folded gently to hold place. The woman moved from room to room with a slow, stated, adjusting the curtains to let in more light, checking her purse for coins, wrapping a clean handkerchief in a twist of wax paper. She pressed her palm briefly to the top of the loaf of bread, cooling near the window, testing its warmth. The crust was golden, the scent sweet and yeasty, mingling now with the stock in the air. In the hallway, a small tin can of starch sat beside the ironing board. The choir robe had already been pressed and folded, hanging from a door frame. Its collar, stitched by hand and washed each week, held the faint scent of bluing and lavender water. The woman had sung in the church choir since she was a girl, never a soloist, but always in harmony. Her voice was not trained, but it was true. She knew how to find the note that sat just beneath the melody and carry it without strain. She opened a drawer and pulled out a sheet of lined paper, folded into quarters. It held the list of hymns for the morning service. She had memorized them already, but reading them again felt like touching base. Her lips moved silently through the first line of Abide With Me, Lee humming under her breath, just loud enough for her daughter to hear. The girl joined in, softly, unsure at first, then firmer as she recognized the tune. Their voices didn't match perfectly, but they found each other like hands in the dark. For a brief moment, the kitchen held more than centipede held harmony, rising gently into the ceiling and settling like dust along the molding. When the song faded, the woman walked to the coat stand and lifted her shawl from the peg. She folded it over her arm, checked the buttons on her coat, then glanced again at the hats. She didn't take one right away. Instead, she looked toward her daughter and smiled. "Which should I wear today?" The girl pointed without hesitation. "The one with the feather." The woman raised an eyebrow gently. "That one's for Easter," she said. But she took it down anyway and held it for a moment, just to feel the difference. Then she placed it back and reached again for the black felt quiet. Known, complete. Outside, the church bell rang its first note low and round, signaling it was time to gather. The sound drifted into the house like a soft command. The woman fastened her coat. The girl stood, clutching the hymnal, her gloves already on. They stepped into the hallway, where the chicken stock continued its slow simmer, filling the air with a depth of flavor that would welcome them home after the service. The hat, now in place, cast a gentle shadow across the woman's brow. She checked her reflection in the glass of the door, not to admire, but to confirm. Everything was as it should be, and as they stepped out into the Sunday morning light, shoulder to shoulder, its breath matched. Shoes, tapping against the stoop the street, met them with warmth, not from the sun, but from the slow wave of neighbors, doing the same, adjusting coats, lifting hats, clutching hymnals, looking toward the sound of song. The walk to church was neither hurried nor silent. The sidewalks, still speckled with fallen leaves, bore the gentle rhythm of footsteps, soft but sure, echoing faintly against the stoops and brick facades. The air held a hint of coolness, tempered by the steady warmth of the rising sun. Here and there voices greeted one another in quiet tones. Neighbors offering nods or brief smiles. A soft murmur woven into the morning's fabric. The woman adjusted her hat with care, her gloved hands steady as she caught the ribbon's edge and smoothed the brim just so. The feather caught a stray sunbeam, glinting softly. Her daughter, fingers tucked into white gloves, too large for her small hands, kept pace alongside, clutching the hymnal close to her chest. Her shoes clicked lightly, polished to a mirror sheen, and her dress swayed gently as she walked. As they moved, the woman's thoughts drifted to the choir practice from earlier in the week. The way voices had blended, some strong, others tentative, forming a chorus that was more than the sum of its parts. She remembered the way the minister had tapped the podium to call for silence, the soft shuffle of hymnals opening, the crisp turn of pages. Familiar hymns, to ones she'd sung for years, carried a weight she could not measure, but could always feel. Near the church steps, men and women gathered, hats and coats arranged with the care of ritual, children clutching prayer books or hands held tightly. The group moved slowly, forming lines without instruction, a gentle ebb and flow that guided them inside. Inside, the sanctuary was cool, scented faintly of beeswax and polished wood. Light streamed through stained glass windows, painting the pews with soft hues of ruby, sapphire, and emerald. The choir loft loomed quietly above, the organ pipes rising like silent sentinels. The woman took her place in the pew beside her daughter, settling the shawl more snugly around her shoulders. The service began with a hymn the same, one she had hummed at home, voices rising in unison, the congregation filling the air with sound both hopeful and calm. The woman closed her eyes briefly, feeling the vibration of the song pass through her. The notes wove through the rafters, threading together generations of worshipers who had filled this space before her. Between hymns, there were moments of prayer and reflection. The minister's voice was soft but clear, each word measured and deliberate. The woman listened not just to the sermon, but to the quiet pauses in between, the spaces where faith rested and deepened. Her daughter squeezed her hand gently during these moments, a small comfort in the vast room. After the service, the congregation lingered in clusters, exchanging greetings and news. The woman and her daughter joined a small group near the door, their voices low and easy. They spoke of the weather, of church dinners to come, of neighbors unwell and friends returning from visits. The choir's practice during the week had been a thread that connected all these lives, a place where voices met and blended, where burdens were eased through song, and where community was woven softly but surely. As the crowd dispersed, the woman felt the warmth of belonging settle over her, a quiet glow that would carry her through the coming days. The walk home was slower, marked by small stops to greet friends or share a word. The smell of simmering chicken stock greeted them as they approached the brownstone, a reminder of home, of nourishment, of care. The kitchen welcomed them with its steady warmth, the promise of rest and replenishment. The woman peeled off her gloves, her hat, and settled in to tend the pot, stirring slowly as the flavors deepened. The girl set the table, her movements careful, the hymnal resting on a chair nearby. Here, in these moments, the day folded softly into evening. Held in the gentle rhythm of hats hung, voices softened, and food shared, as evening settled quietly. Over the brownstone, the warmth of the day's prayers and songs lingered gently in the rooms. The church hats, carefully placed back on their hooks, seemed to hold a softness, as if touched by the light and voices that had filled the sanctuary hours before. The feathered brim, the cream-colored ribbon, the simple black felt-all bore the imprint of reverence and care, resting now in peaceful stillness. The kitchen, once filled with the scent of simmering chicken stock, softened as the stove's flame was lowered. The pot left to steep quietly. The deep, earthy aroma hung in the air, weaving between the wooden cupboards and settling into the corners like a warm embrace. The scent spoke of home, of meals prepared slowly, lovingly, for the bodies and spirits that had traveled the city, streets, and gathered in worship. The woman sat at the small kitchen table, her hands folded in her lap, the faint trace of starch still on her fingers. Her eyes traced the patterns of light and shadow that played across the walls, slowly shifting as the sun dipped behind the rooftops. Her breathing was steady, measured, as if sinking to the fading hymns that still echoed softly in her mind. Her daughter leaned against her side, head resting gently on his shoulder. The child's eyes were heavy with sleep, lids fluttering like petals closing at dusk. The softness of her breathing was a quiet rhythm, steady and slow, anchoring the moment in peace. Outside, Harlem's sounds softened, the distant murmur of late footsteps, the gentle hum of conversation fading with the day. A lamp flickered to life in a nearby window, its glow warm and inviting. The street settled into night's calm, the city breathing out and preparing for rest. Within the brownstone, the quiet held no urgency. There was no need for words, no need for movement. The hats, the choir robes folded and hung, the lingering scent of food, all formed a gentle stillness that wrapped the house like a shawl. The woman thought then of the week ahead, the rising and falling of routine, the soft returning to tasks known and loved. But for now, there was only this, only the slow folding of time into moments of grace. She reached down and took her daughter's hand, its fingers curling gently around small, warm fingers. The connection was simple, but it spoke volumes of wordless promise carried through the days and nights. The church hats would wait, the choir songs would return, and the chicken stock would simmer again. But the peace of this evening, the quiet after song and service, would linger longer than any note. And as the night deepened, the woman closed her eyes, letting sleep find her gently, as the house held its breath and the city dreamed beneath a blanket of stars. The sidewalks of Harlem on a warm afternoon were like open canvases, waiting patiently to be transformed by small hands and vibrant chalk. The sun hung high, casting a mellow glow that softened the edges of buildings and warmed the cool gray stone beneath. The air carried the faint scent of summer fresh-cut grass from a distant park, mingled with the distant notes of a street musician's soft trumpet, and the sweet aroma of a nearby bakery's cinnamon rolls. On a quiet block near the brownstone, children gathered in small clusters, their laughter muted by the gentle breeze, but present like a soft melody beneath the city's hum. Kneeling on the pavement, they traced shapes and letters, hopscotch grids and scribbled dreams, their fingers stained with pastels of blue, pink, yellow, and green. The chalk dust settled like a powdery mist around their knees and hands, a delicate layer that caught the sunlight and seemed to glow softly. One girl, no older than 8, balanced carefully on one foot as she hopped between numbered squares, drawn in neat chalk lines. Her dress fluttered slightly with each movement, and her bare feet pressed firmly against the warm stone, the soles roughened by years of similar afternoons. Nearby, a boy bent low to draw a new pattern, his tongue pressed thoughtfully against his lip as he worked with steady concentration. The games were simple, but rich a dance of balance and rhythm, of counting and stepping, of quiet rules passed from one child to another without words. Each mark on the sidewalk was temporary, yet in their minds, these patterns were as permanent as any story. The chalk squares were boundaries and stages, challenges and celebrations. Nearby, an older woman sat on a stoop, her hands folded in her lap. She watched with a gentle smile, the soft rustle of her skirt blending with the distant calls of vendors. She remembered playing similar games on the same sidewalks years before, when the city was quieter and the world seemed larger and smaller all at once. The sounds of the neighborhood footsteps, distant music, the gentle clatter of a basketball against brick wove together like a lullaby. The sun began to dip just slightly, stretching long shadows across the pavement and deepening the colors of the chalk dot. The children paused between games, catching their breath, sharing smiles, and wiping chalk dust from their cheeks. The girl, with the fluttering dress, knelt again, drawing a circle within a square, her fingers careful and precise. The boy glanced up and nodded, approving in the soft light. The sidewalk became a map of friendship, of imagination, of afternoons folded gently into memory. The afternoon wore on, and the children's chalk games unfolded with quiet purpose. The patterns on the sidewalk grew more intricate circles, nested within squares, spirals unfurling like gentle waves, and a hopscotch grid extended by a few extra numbers, added by a child's eager hand. The dust of chalk clung to their skin and clothes, a soft haze that caught the fading sunlight like powdered sugar. Their bare feet pressed against the pavement, warm and rough, feeling every crease and pebble beneath. Texture of the stone was familiar, smooth in some places, cracked and pocked in others. Imperfection, a silent companion in their play. Their knees bore faint scrapes from moments of balance lost, from quick pivots, from careful landings. Occasionally, the children paused to wipe their faces and hands on their shirts, smudging colors like watercolor paintings that refused to stay neat. The scent of chalk mingled with the sweetness of nearby flowering bushes, and the faint earthiness of sun-baked brick walls. There was a rhythm to their movements, soft steps, hushed laughter, quiet counting that felt like a song without sound. One boy drew a new designer, winding path dotted with stars and arrows, while a girl traced a heart beside it, her fingers moving slowly as if coaxing the shapes to hold longer against the inevitable sweep of wind or footsteps. They traded suggestions in whispered tones, creating rules that bent and shifted like shadows. A stray breeze lifted a swirl of chalk dust, sending it drifting over the children's heads like a gentle cloud. They stopped to watch it rise and fall, silent for a moment, before a girl clapped her hands and the game resumed. Nearby, the woman on the stoop shifted, her gaze softening as she remembered. She saw herself in the children, the eagerness, the patience, the unspoken understanding of shared spaces. She recalled how the sidewalk had once been her canvas, her stage, her playground and confessional. The afternoon light mellowed, the shadows growing longer and cooler. The children's clothes clung damply to their skin, the warmth of the day giving way to a gentle evening chill. Their voices lowered, their games slowed. As the city around them began its transition from day to night, the girl with the fluttering dress paused, crouching low to draw a final square at the edge of the sidewalk. She balanced on one foot, her breath steady, her hands sure. The chalk made a crisp line, darker now in the softened light. She looked up at her friends, who smiled and nodded, understanding the unspoken end to their play. The chalk drawings would not last soon. Feet would erase them. Rain would wash them away, but the memories of the afternoon, the laughter, the feeling of sun and stone beneath skin would fold gently into their days to come as they gathered their things and began to disperse. The air was thick with the scent of dusk-cool earth, fading flowers, and a distant hint of supper cooking. The sidewalk, now empty, held the faintest traces of chalk, glowing softly under the first stars of evening as twilight settled over Harlem. The sidewalk lay quiet, a faint dusting of chalk powder tracing the outlines of games now ended. The afternoon's laughter and footsteps had softened into memory, leaving the stone cool beneath the first stars of evening. The air had shifted, no longer warm with sunlight, but sweet with the promise of rest and gathering shadows. The children have scattered to their homes, their bare feet replaced by slippers, their voices now hushed as dinner called them indoors. One by one, windows lit up along the block, casting golden rectangles onto the street and giving the old bricks a gentle glow. Somewhere nearby, the scent of cooking bread mingled with simmering stew, wrapping the neighborhood in comfort. Girl from the day's games lingered for a moment at the doorway of her brownstone. She brushed her hands on her dress, wiping away the last traces of chalk dust, feeling the faint roughness of the stone beneath her shoes. The warmth of the day still hummed beneath her skin, slow and steady. Inside, the house welcomed her with the soft murmur of settling a kettle, whispering on the stove, a chair creaking as someone sat, the quiet rustle of fabric as clothes were folded and put away. The world beyond the door slowed and softened, and within those walls, peace was folded gently into the spaces between breaths. She placed the chalk sticks carefully on a shelf, their colors dulled but not forgotten. Each one held a story, a moment of sunlit play, a map of friendship drawn in fleeting lines. The sidewalk would be washed clean by rain or footsteps, but the memory remained a quiet treasure pressed into the heart. Her mother called softly from the kitchen, a voice wrapped in warmth and calm. The girl turned, stepping fully inside, leaving the day's chalk dust behind on the threshold. As she settled into the evening's routine, washing hands in cool water, helping set the table, listening to the soft songs that drifted from the radio, the memories of the afternoon folded gently into her thoughts. The feel of chalk between fingers, the warmth of the sun on her back, the soft brush of a friend's hand as they played all became threads woven into the fabric of a quiet day. And as sleep approached, with its slow and steady pull, the house grew still. The sidewalk outside rested under the watch of the moon, ready to be marked again by new games, new dreams, new laughter. For now, it was enough. The day's last light softened over Harlem as the brownstones settled into the gentle rhythm of evening. Outside, the sky stretched wide and pale above the rooftops, a wash of lavender fading slowly to deep indigo. The sun had slipped beyond the horizon, leaving behind a tender glow that kissed the edges of windows and cast long, soft shadows through the narrow streets. The air was cool now, carrying a hint of wood smoke from nearby fires and the faint scent of wet earth from a distant summer rain. Inside, the house exhaled a quiet warmth. The fading sun filtered through lace curtains, painting delicate patterns of shadow and light on the worn wooden floors. The rooms held a soft hush, not of silence, but of rest, a pause between day and night. In the kitchen, the last of the supper preparations were underway, but even these movements were slow, deliberate, wrapped in calm. A worn tin oil lamp sat on the kitchen table, its glass chimney catching the last rays of daylight and fracturing them into faint prisms of color. Beside it lay a small, folded rag, ready to be used for cleaning the lamp before it was lit. The lamp's brass base was dulled with age, speckled with tiny scratches and a faint patina that spoke of years of use. Yet it remained sturdy and dependable, a humble guardian of the nights coming dark. Near the stove, a large cast iron pot steamed softly, its lid raised just enough to let tendrils of savory aroma escape. The smell of simmering broth mingled with the earthy scent of root vegetables, carrots, onions, and potatoes slowly softening in the rich liquid. The subtle sweetness of herbs, perhaps thyme and bay leaf, drifted through the kitchen air, blending with the faint tang of fresh bread. Cooling on a cloth-lined basket, the woman moved through the kitchen with practiced grace. Her hands, worn but steady, adjusted the flame on the stove's burner, nudging it lower to a gentle simmer. She wiped her palms on her apron, a soft cotton cloth faded to a gentle blue, and then reached for the lamp's chimney. The glass was cool but smooth beneath her fingers as she lifted it carefully, setting it aside on the table to clean. The rag came alive with motion, circling in slow, careful sweeps over the glass, removing smudges and faint soot. As she worked, the lamp seemed to brighten in her hands, not with flame, but with a quiet readiness, as though it, too, awaited the coming night with patience. The steady rhythm of cloth on glass matched the soft ticking of a clock somewhere beyond the next room, filling the kitchen with gentle sound. The woman glanced toward the window, where the first stars were beginning to twinkle faintly in the darkening sky. The neighborhood below was winding down, voices softening, doors closing quietly, footsteps slower. A few lanterns flickered in distant windows, tiny beacons against the encroaching dusk. She replaced the glass chimney on the lamp, twisting it gently to secure its place. The wick was trimmed neatly, the edge even and ready. When the flame was finally lit, the lamp would cast a warm, golden pool of light, pushing back the shadows and drawing the family together. As the night deepened, her daughter sat near the table, her small hands busy folding laundry shirts and linens that had been washed earlier in the day. The girl's movements were careful, the fabric soft and slightly damp beneath her fingers. The scent of clean cotton mingled faintly with the kitchen's richer aromas, creating a delicate tapestry of smell and touch. The child hummed softly, a quiet melody that rose and fell gently, matching the pace of her work. She glanced occasionally toward the stove, watching the steam curl and rise, a swirl of warmth that seemed to dance in the cooling air. Her dress, a simple calico pattern, brushed against the wooden chair as she shifted her weight, the hem catching a stray ray of light. Outside, the night deepened. The breeze carried with it the distant song of a street musician, a slow, mournful tune played on a harmonica, its notes floating through the open window like whispers. Somewhere, a dog barked once, quickly silenced by the quiet that followed. The world outside seemed to exhale with the coming dark, folding itself into sleep. Back inside, the woman moved toward the table once more. She lit a match, the small flame flickering and trembling before catching the lamp's wick. The flame rose steadily, glowing warmly, in the room filled with soft light. Shadows retreated gently from the corners, and the kitchen became a sanctuary of amber and gold. The mother smiled softly at her daughter, whose eyes reflected the lamp's glow. Their hands met briefly over a folded shirt, a touch as gentle as the light itself. Soon, supper would be shared as simple meal, rich with flavor and made tender by care. And after, the lamp would burn low, casting its light on books and whispered stories, on quiet conversations in the slow unfolding of evening. The house, wrapped in the quiet glow of oil and hearth, prepared itself for rest, inviting all who lived within its walls to breathe deep, settle down, and drift gently into night. The steady glow of the oil lamp bathed the kitchen in a gentle amber light, softening the edges of worn furniture and casting long, flickering shadows that seemed to dance with quiet grace across the walls. The scent of simmering broth lingered, weaving through the air like a gentle thread, mingling with the faint perfume of freshly laundered cotton and the subtle, earthy smell of wood smoke that drifted in from a neighboring chimney. The woman moved with deliberate calm, her hands steady as she set the table for supper. Each plate was placed with care, the delicate clink of china softly echoing in the room. Silverware gleamed faintly in the lamp's warm light, arranged just so, the folds of linen napkins tucked neatly beside them. The chair at the head of the table was pulled out slightly. It's a quiet invitation for the daughter to join Dart near the window. The child gathered the last of the laundry, folding shirts and linens with practiced precision. The fabric was still warm, from drying soft to the touch, its faint scent carrying the memory of sunlit afternoons and gentle breezes. Her fingers smoothed each garment as if to press the day's calm into the cloth. A ritual in itself. Outside, the night deepened, and the hum of the city softened into a lullaby. Voices faded, footsteps slowed, and a distant echo of a harmonica's melancholic tune drifted faintly on the cool evening air. The soft rustle of leaves, stirred by a gentle breeze, was a whispered accompaniment to the fading light. The woman paused briefly by the stove, stirring the pot with a wooden spoon worn smooth by years of use. The broth bubbled quietly, the steam curling upward in lazy spirals, carrying the warmth of rosemary and bay leaf. She lifted the lid just enough to release the scent more fully, the aroma wrapping around her like a comforting embrace. Returning to the table, she lit a small candle, its flickering flame adding another layer of soft light. The shadows deepened and shifted, but the room remained warm and inviting. She glanced toward her daughter, who was now setting a small vase of wildflowers in the center of the table, a few sprigs of lavender and daisies, picked from the window box earlier that day. The girl's eyes sparkled faintly in the candlelight, reflecting the soft glow as she arranged the flowers with delicate care. Her dress rustled gently as she moved, the fabric whispering against the wooden floor. The scent of the flowers mingled subtly with the kitchen aromas, adding a fresh, floral note that brightened the quiet evening. The mother and daughter shared a glance, an unspoken understanding passing between them, a moment of connection born from shared work and quiet companionship. No words were necessary. The warmth of the room, the steady light, and the comforting scents spoke eloquently in their place. The woman filled the glasses with water, the clear liquid catching the candlelight and fracturing it into tiny prisms. She placed a glass gently before her daughter and then sat down herself, folding her hands calmly in her lap. The chair creaked softly beneath her, a familiar sound that settled the space further into stillness. Supper was simple slices of cornbread, a bowl of warm stew, rich with tender vegetables and softened meat, the bread perfect for dipping into the savory broth. Each bite was slow, deliberate, savored not for hunger alone, but as part of the day's quiet ritual. The flickering candlelight danced on the steam rising from the bowls, casting gentle patterns across the table between mouthfuls. The daughter asked soft questions about the day, about the iron shirts, the folded laundry, the light in the lamp. The mother answered with calm patience, her voice steady and even, weaving stories of past evenings just like this one. She spoke of women who had come before them, who had tended homes by lamplight, who had found peace in these small, repeated Axe. The girl listened attentively, eyes wide in the lamplight, imagining the rooms of long ago. The hands that had pressed fabric, the lamps that had burned low in quiet kitchens. She felt the weight of those stories, not in grand events, but in the touch of warm water, the scent of softened cotton, the glow of a small flame. After supper, the dishes were cleared with gentle care. The woman filled a basin with warm water, scented faintly with lavender soap, and together they washed the plates, the sound of running water soft and steady. The kitchen filled with the quiet rhythms of evening chores, the clink of utensils, the swish of cloth on wood, the occasional sigh of relief as tasks were completed. The lamp was refilled, the wick trimmed and relit, its flame steady and bright against the darkening room. The house seemed to exhale once more, settling into a deeper, softer quiet. The outside world faded into the background, leaving only the warm glow and the gentle pulse of family life within. As the night deepened, the mother and daughter moved to the parlor. Abigail gathered a few well-loved books from the shelf. Their pages yellowed and soft and settled beside her mother on the worn sofa. The woman's voice rose in gentle cadence, reading stories not hurriedly, but slowly, savoring each word, each pause, drawing her child into the calm world of imagination. The lamp's light flickered softly, casting long shadows that stretched and swayed gently against the walls. Outside, the stars began to blink awake, distant and steady, watching over the quiet home. The evening's calm wrapped around them like a soft blanket, holding the space between wakefulness and sleep. The gentle sound of the mother's voice, the warmth of the lamp, and the softness of the words wove together into a lullaby without musica, song of peace, of safety, of rest. And as the story ended, gaze closed slowly, breathing deep and even, carried gently toward sleep. The mother sat a moment longer, watching the steady rise and fall of her child's chest, feeling the quiet fulfillment of a day well tended. The lamp burned low, like a small beacon in the gathering dark, a promise of warmth and comfort. Until morning, the evening deepened around the softly glowing oil lamp, its gentle flame casting delicate shadows that flickered like quiet whispers along the walls of the parlor. The fabric of the curtains stirred faintly in a mild night breeze, slipping through a cracked window, carrying with it the faint, sweet aroma of lilacs from a neighbor's garden, mingled with the distant hum of the city settling into sleep. Stillness of the room felt almost tangible, as if time itself had slowed to a gentle pulse, steady and unhurried, inviting every breath to ease softly into the next. The woman sat quietly on the worn sofa, the weight of the day's rhythms lingering in her hands, now folded loosely in her lap. Her eyes traced the faint pattern of light on the ceiling, a gentle interplay of warmth and shadow that seemed to echo the slow descent into rest. Beside her, the child's breathing had deepened into the steady cadence of sleep, each breath rising and falling like a calm tide beneath the soft folds of a blanket. The girl's fingers twitched ever so slightly, curled around a small, well-worn doll. The cotton threads of its dress frayed at the edges from countless nights held close. The quiet was broken only by the faint crackling of the lamp's wick and the soft sigh of the wooden floor settling under the cool night air. Outside, the city's murmurs had hushed, replaced by the occasional distant bark of a dog, or the low murmur of voices fading into the dark. The scent of cooking fires, mingled with the sweetness of lilacs and the faint musk of earth, drifted in through the window, blending seamlessly with the warmth of the room's amber glow. The woman's thoughts drifted, gentle and unfocused, like the curl of smoke from the hearth of a neighboring home. She recalled the simple, steady work of the day, the folding of crisp linens warmed by the sun, the slow stirring of the simmering broth, the careful cleaning of the oil lamp until its glass shone like liquid gold. Each task had been performed with a quiet reverence, an unspoken ceremony woven into the fabric of daily life. The ritual of care, of tending, of nurturing a home was itself a kind of prayer spoken not in words, but in touch, scent, and light. Her fingers moved unconsciously, brushing against the soft folds of her skirt, tracing the worn pattern of the upholstery. The texture was familiar, threadbare in places, but rich with memory. The chair beside her held the imprint of countless evenings spent in quiet reflection, its wooden arms polished smooth by the passing of hands across many years. Nearby, a faded photograph rested in a simple frame-in image of women gathered on a porch. Their smiles gentle, their eyes steady. It was a reminder of roots, of lineage, of the hands that had shaped the home before hers. The child shifted slightly in her sleep, her lashes fluttering like delicate wings as she turned toward her mother. A faint smile touched the woman's lips as she reached out, lightly brushing a stray lock of hair from the girl's forehead. The hair was soft, still carrying the subtle scent of lavender and soap from the day's bath. The warmth of the child's skin beneath her fingers was a quiet anchor, grounding her in the present moment. The lamp's light danced on the pages of an open book resting on the side tabula collection of poetry, worn at the edges, its spine softened by years of turning. The woman's gaze lingered there, the words whispering faintly in her mind. Softly now, the world exhales. The night enfolds with gentle arms. She breathed in time with the verse, allowing the cadence to settle deep within her. Outside, the moon had risen fully, its silver light filtering through the window and mingling with the amber glow of the lamp. The interplay of these lights painted the room with a serene glow, softening every edge and drawing every shadow into quiet harmony. The scent of lilacs grew stronger with the night air, a delicate perfume that seemed to cradle the room in a tender embrace. The woman's thoughts drifted to the coming day, not with worry or haste, but with calm acceptance. There would be more tasks, more moments to fill with care. The folding of clothes, the stirring of soups, the simple acts of tending a home that spoke louder than any grand gesture. Each act was a thread in the tapestry of life, a quiet song of resilience, continuity, and love. She glanced once more at the sleeping child, whose chest rose and fell with perfect, peaceful rhythm. The weight of responsibility was softened here, held gently between moments of stillness. It was in these small spaces between light and shadow, between breath and silence, that life found its quiet strength. The lamp flickered, the flame dancing briefly before settling again into steady glow. The night deepened further, the world outside slipping fully into rest. The woman closed her eyes softly, letting the calm that filled the room seep into her bones. The warmth of the lamp, the softness of the child's breathing, the faint scent of lilacs and wood smoke all wove together into a blanket of peace. Slowly, deliberately, she rose from the sofa, careful not to disturb the stillness. The gentle creak of the floor beneath her feet was a lullaby in itself, familiar and comforting. She moved toward the window, drawing the curtain just enough to shield the room from the outside world, while still allowing the tender light of moon and lamp to mingle. Turning back, she placed a soft hand on the child's shoulder, silent promise of presence and protection. The house, wrapped in the glow of oil and night, held them both in its quiet embrace. The evening stretched on, slow and unbroken, a meditation in light and shadow, scent and sound. The world outside was vast and unknowable, but here, within these walls, there was only calm, only care, only the gentle unfolding of night into rest, and as sleep gathered like a soft cloak around them, the woman allowed herself to drift, carried on the steady breath of the house, the quiet glow of the lamp, and the peaceful rhythm of a day gently lay to rest.